those jobs go, and that's fine. They're not redundancies.
Yeah.
They're just owned, for want of a better word, by someone else.
Yeah.
But the company is still downsizing.
The company's still downsizing.
Unless it spends that windfall on other investment and, dare I say, more jobs, then the net effect is still they might as well be redundant.
Exactly.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We were looking forward to a sort of lovely, it's been such a great week. We were going to go and sort of hang out by the river and all that sort of thing.
Chair.
And it's just been pissing it down all day. That happened last week when we went to the Anchor.
Yeah.
And that rained for a couple of hours when it wasn't even
The gods are
forecasting.
conspiring against us on Fridays.
There's something going on, isn't there?
It's a government-engineered weather.
Yeah, it's sort of nudge unit making it rain.
But they want people outside, don't they? So they prefer it to be warm, I'm guessing.
I don't know
Going
what they want. I don't think they know what they want
dangerous.
either. I was just listening to a podcast with a woman who's written a book about the whole psychological nudge campaign of basically trying to keep everyone shit scared to make sure they behave.
I saw your Facebook on it. It looks quite interesting.
It's very interesting. Maybe we'll go on a tangent about that later. So Pierre, you haven't got arrested this week, have you?
No.
Well done.
Arrested? I wasn't arrested.
You were.
Okay, yeah, that sounds cooler.
Thought you were walking a bit strangely when you came in last week. Okay, well, we'll just crack on, actually, because you've got more grown-upness to do after.
No, we're good.
When you finish doing that, are you going to have a beer, or are you just going to...
Yeah.
Yeah, good man. Talking about beer, I wish we could pan the camera around here. Making up for last week. Everyone just brought some.
A lot.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, what we can talk about. We had a short week, and you were off the Wednesday as well. So
Tuesday.
Oh, you were off the Tuesday, sorry, yeah. So you've only been working 3 days, I've only been working 4 days.
Yeah.
So we got nothing to talk about. So see you later. Make sure you join us for the next one. No, only joking. We're going to start. You did manage to write a big piece about automation, which is the sort of ongoing theme, automation within the telecoms world, not just technologically, but what that means for the companies and the sector on the whole. So I think we'll head off with that, because I haven't written anything remotely interesting this week. One of the things I did write about, which we've sort of touched on before, but it was official this week, was Huawei launching its Harmony OS, which is its alternative to Android / fork of Android.
Yeah.
And we can just talk about the claims they made about it, how plausible it is, all that sort of thing. And then I've written a couple of stories this week. Our third segment's often a bit less telecoms-y, and this time it's just about... it's basically sort of US trade policy / the US sort of trying to impose its will on the rest of the world. And, on the whole, I'm on the American side. Certainly if I've got to choose between America and China, I'm likely to choose America, as their values and supposed commitment to freedom and democracy is aligned more to my ideals than how China does its business.
Yeah.
I'd rather not have to pick a team, but there we go. But I just think America, I think we might have mentioned it before, there was a Spectator leader written by, maybe it was Neil Ferguson or someone else, just going, watch out, West. You're starting to act like all these people you criticise.
Yeah.
And the US has done another couple of things this week, which, again, sort of feed into that narrative. So I think that's how I'll finish it off. But for the first... Oh, yes, nearly forgot. If you're watching this on the site, you can also watch it on YouTube and Facebook. Is that what we say? I've forgotten. I'm going to see now. I'm going to be 50 this year.
Wow. That is old.
It's proper old. So I'm going to start talking like Joe Biden. If you're watching this, you can, and all that, and malarkey. And you can listen to it on...
Does he use the word malarkey?
He did.
I love
once,
it.
Yes.
Right.
I mean, he was born 100 years ago. Yeah, he says, come on, man. He keeps saying borderline pervy things as well.
Right.
Anyway. You can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Okay. Ian, I'm going to hand it straight over to you. You've written a big old piece looking at the latest that's going on with automation and what that says for operators, principally, haven't you?
Yeah, well, it's not just automation. I mean, automation comes into it, but I've been tracking employment figures within the big operators for about 5 years now, more or less, since I joined Light Reading.
So you've got a proper spreadsheet on the go?
Yeah, I've got a big spreadsheet which crunches a lot of data. It's basically it's kind of the top 20, and I've had to sort of bring new ones in and cut them out because there's been some merger activity.
Yes,
but it's kind of
annoying, isn't it? It messes up your spreadsheet.
And it's sort of the top 20 telecom operators headquartered in either the Americas or Western Europe. So it doesn't look at like the big Chinese players, a lot of the Asian players. It doesn't look at people like Telstra in Australia. I mean, it probably wouldn't qualify anyway. And it doesn't consider a lot of so there's big parts of the world it doesn't consider. But I just think it's a kind of nice weather vane.
Tends to be the biggest, bar the Chinese ones, the biggest, bar the, let's say, the Asian ones.
I mean, it's got people like, so in the
whatever.
US, it's got AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile in it, obviously. It has American Mobile from Latin America. It has Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, Vodafone in Europe, and it has a bunch of others. It gets down to smaller players eventually. I mean, I think the smallest in there is probably someone like KPN in the Netherlands or something, or Proximus even in Belgium. I mean, they're national incumbents, but they're not. And by biggest, I mean by sales, not by headcount. So it's on the basis of revenues that I've sort of picked those 20. And I've been looking at more or less since we started writing about automation as a thing in telecom. And automation is obviously a massive topic, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're cutting jobs. Yeah. You know, you can automate processes and still keep people there. And
well, that's interesting. You say that. You said it doesn't necessarily mean it.
No,
but surely by definition, if you automate something, you transfer it from being done by a person to done by a machine.
You do, but I guess there's there's things that we both do that you could automate through things like robotic process automation software, and it would just basically give us time to do other things that we don't get around to doing.
Right, so it's freeing up labour.
It's freeing up labour.
That's the theory.
I mean, that's what the apologists for automation say. But the spreadsheet itself, I started tracking it because there is obviously, as you said, there's a knock-on effect of automation that you would expect it to lead to some loss of jobs. And this is an old thing. This goes back hundreds of years to when people started coming out of their bedrooms making, woolly sweaters and going into factories to produce them.
Spinning Jenny.
Yeah, and everybody was worried that all those people in their bedrooms who'd been doing it were going to lose jobs. And actually the opposite happened because it industrialised things and it brought a huge number of people into factories and it created jobs. But I think what we're, the worry about automation now, the people who raise concerns about it, and there's a lot of books that have been written by people who are a lot smarter than me on this in recent years.
I think that's unlikely.
Is that you get into the stage now where it's not just, you automate more and more. So you automate manual processes and things that you can do in a factory environment, and that takes sort of the cotton industry stuff away. And then and the stage we're at now is getting into sort of automating white collar work.
That's right.
So when you're automating,
so that's a big difference between that and the industrial revolution.
I mean when you've got to the stage where you can have machines that look at X-rays that you'd get oncologists to look at normally, and the machines do a better job of looking at them and picking out spots that might be cancerous. You're putting out of work extremely qualified people, and it's like, well, where do those people go? And you see a similar thing sort of happening on the telecom side with automation. So a lot of the tools that are getting introduced into networks and into the network operations center basically mean that you can run your systems just through very clever software programs. You have closed loop systems, they call it. It's one of those sort of horrible expressions, and zero touch processes where they're basically euphemisms for not having anybody involved.
And they talk about zero touch processes, and it's also utopian, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like the undertone's always like, don't worry.
I know.
The machines have got this.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah.
Exactly. And this is one of the reasons I started the spreadsheet, because I thought, a lot of people at the time, a few years ago, and there's still now, who would say, well, no, it's gonna, it's not gonna kill jobs, because it always brings, look at the history of automation, and it's never had that effect. It's always produced jobs in other areas. You might kill some jobs here, but other ones spring up in this area. Now, it's
true to some extent.
It's true to some extent, and my concern is that because of the way automation is going, and that more and more stuff gets automated, that you eventually, just because something's happened before doesn't mean it's going to carry on happening in the future. Yeah, so you've always got to be careful about looking at history anyway, I think, and trying to draw lessons.
And just over extrapolating curves.
Yeah, and I think it's just getting to the stage where there's so much that you can automate that you really are sort of leaving a limited number of roles left, I think, for people to do. And that's not proven yet, because there clearly is, there's a lot of jobs being created in other areas, but they're not I mean, my spreadsheet, getting back to the spreadsheet, it sort of shows to some extent that that's not happening within telecom. And a lot of the job cuts that have happened, I should point out, aren't just to do with automation. So,
Well, they're not going to explicitly say that, though, are they?
They're not going to explicitly say
Dave
that.
lost his job because we got
I think it's just
Monitron
interesting to look at
4000.
what's happening to the telecom workforce generally, because operators have, we talk about this all the time on the podcast, that they're in low growth markets. We haven't really been able to substantially increase sales for many, many years now. They're under huge capital, it's a really capital intensive industry. So they're all spending huge amounts of money on networks, on spectrum. They're heavily regulated. They're often in competitive markets. They've got new challenges emerging in technology. It's not a good environment for them to be in lots of ways. And what has happened is that there's been this prioritization, I think, of efficiency above all else. The only way for them really to sort of boost profits and they need to reduce debt.
Well,
and
I've always thought that ever since I started learning about business, which I've done on a very informal, just make it up as you go along way, like a proper journalist should. It struck me that the ultimate aim of business is growth.
Yeah.
But the ultimate driver of growth is profitability.
Yeah.
Unless you've got an incredibly powerful sort of loss leader business case, like someone like Netflix or whatever, or Amazon for most of its life. And then profitability is simply revenue minus overheads.
Yeah.
And so there's only two ways.
There's only two ways
to increase profitability.
Yeah.
And it seems that the operators have just finally given up on the revenue part.
Yeah. I mean, some operators are really religious about it and don't even make any excuses anymore. I mean, Telenor is a classic example, which is maybe the one that's downsized the most dramatically, according to my spreadsheet. They used to have 38,000 employees back in sort of 2014, 2015 timeframe. They've now got 20,000. Now, a lot of those 18 to 20,000 jobs that have gone have been because they've sold a lot of assets. They've basically
bulk job loss from that.
And in that case, jobs aren't necessary. If you sell a business, so for instance, they sold an Indian operation that they had called Uninor, and they also sold some assets in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, jobs don't necessarily go unless the buyer then starts cutting as well. It's just you're moving jobs to another.
But what
company.
about your accounting of the jobs?
Well,
in your spreadsheet, what do you do with those jobs when there's a divestment?
I've taken them. So my spreadsheet shows that they go off, but there's always an explanation in my write-up.
But I think an interesting part of how you're accounting for that is those jobs go, and that's fine. They're not redundancies. They're just owned, for want of a better word, by someone else.
Yeah.
But the company is still downsizing.
The company's still downsizing.
Unless it spends that windfall on other investment and, dare I say, more jobs, then the net effect is still... they might as well be redundant.
Exactly. And the interesting thing about Telenor is that if you look at its revenues before it had these asset sales, they're actually quite similar to where they were back in, the revenues they reported last year are quite similar to what they reported in 2014, 2015. So if you look at, so this is the other interesting metric, is revenues per employee, which is a very interesting way of looking at productivity.
Yeah.
Now, there's lots of other reasons why your margins might be under pressure, interest payments, depreciation and amortization of equipment, all that sort of stuff. But it's a very kind of, simple way to show how efficient a company is with its workforce. Looking at revenues per employee is really, really interesting, I think. And if you look at Telenor, it's basically doubled that because its revenues have stayed the same, more or less, and its workforce has halved. Its revenues per employee figures doubled.
So investors are laughing.
And their operating profit margin has just gone like that. I mean, probably more than any other operator. But the interesting thing is it's not just selling these assets in Central and Eastern Europe and India. They're absolutely committed to automation. They have capital investment days. It's a major topic. They talk about zero touch a lot. They talk about what they can do to make the business more efficient. And it's not just automation in terms of taking advantage of clever technologies that run themselves. It's just doing things, for instance, network sharing is something that's become a very big deal, I think, in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, and we've written about it a lot. Tower divestments and putting your buying active equipment with another operator and sharing that and using technologies to be able to run the base station.
There's a degree of that whole sell and lease back thing, which companies have been doing for a while. I can remember when I first started covering Nokia, I think maybe as an analyst or as a journalist. And it was as an analyst, and they were falling off their perch because of the iOS and Android, which was just wrecking their smartphone business. and they've got this Nokia Towers over in Espoo, however you pronounce it, in Finland. And they basically flogged it and leased it back. This whole fucking great big corporate phallic symbol that's supposed to be the look how badass we are. We've got our own shiny building.
Yeah.
They sold it and leased it back, which to me just felt like a really graphic admission that times were tough.
Yeah.
You know, if you own your house, which I do, I wouldn't sell it and then rent it back unless I was really struggling for cash, would I?
No. And then they've been forced to do all sorts of things like this, flogging towers, spinning off bits of the business. The network sharing thing obviously leads to a big drop in headcount, because if you've got one base station that two companies are able to sort of share, active equipment sharing rather than just passive, you don't need the same number of technicians to go around inspecting all this equipment. You can do things like dividing a market up geographically and relying on a smaller workforce. You can have joint procurement and that sort of thing. So it all leads to kind of headcount reduction. And the other thing that I think that we've seen that's had some effect as well is during the pandemic, and this is kind of automation. It wouldn't probably get called automation, but people don't go into shops anymore. They don't go and buy phones from a physical store and talk to somebody and say, I want to open up this plan.
Out much, I can tell you
you go online and you do it online. And even if you've got problems with your phone, increasingly what happens now is you don't phone someone up and say, my phone's not working and there's a problem with my plan. You get onto a little chat messenger tool that's probably automated. It's probably actually an AI, a basic AI that's corresponding with you a lot of the time. Certainly in the case of Vodafone, which has made a big deal of this system that it's rolled out. And you just need far fewer staff on the customer services side. You don't need the real estate footprint that you used to have.
And anyway, most customer services, certainly for operators that I'm aware of, are chatbots.
Chatbot, of course, yeah, that's what I mean. AI systems that basically correspond with you. A chatbot, an online sales channel doesn't need a store, obviously, with 7 or 8 people in it, sort of walking you around the phones and telling you how it works.
Phone.
So it's kind of it probably wouldn't get called automation, but it's part of the same story. And so, as I say, it's not all automation, but that combined with other efficiency measures, combined with M&A activity, means that what's happened in the last 5 years at these 20 companies that we're tracking is about 230,000 jobs have disappeared, which equals about 12% of the total of those companies.
So on the whole, of the leading Western operators,
are 12%
they've
smaller.
Had a 12% headcount reduction over the last 5 years,
which is substantial. Last year alone, it was about 55,000, which I think's probably been the worst year for employees
since, was for a lot of companies
since
last
2016. And as I say, obviously the pandemic's had an effect there, because I think it's forced a lot of companies to look at efficiency more closely. It's allowed them to close stores. We've seen a lot more stuff going on, like network sharing. And things like just being able to close down older networks. People are increasingly talking about sunsetting their 3G networks.
That's a great one. I bet we can thank the Yanks for that.
Yeah,
or taking love a euphemism like that. yeah, we're not killing him, we're just sunsetting him.
Yeah.
Retiring it.
Exactly.
Yeah, scrapping it. Yeah. And the same with copper.
The sun's going to slowly go down on it. It'll be nice. You'll have a little cocktail.
So it's it doesn't look good for this is the thing is the jobs in that within that 230,000 that have been lost to automation is obviously it's just a fraction of that, but they've not been replaced within telecom. It's very hard. There's not a lot of greenfield networks in telecom that spring up, are there? The only big examples that I can really think of are Rakuten and Dish in developed markets. Telecom vendors are under a similar amount of pressure. So the automations, the automation apologists' argument that the jobs that are lost will get replaced in other areas. Well, maybe they will, but that doesn't seem to be happening within telecom itself. It's almost like these people who are losing work are having to look to other sectors, and I suspect a lot of it is actually the big technology companies. And there are clear examples of some of the people that we have at conferences or that we've had at conferences in the past have moved from the telecom world to the public cloud world,
especially public cloud world, as they start to make more and more noise about mobile edge,
completely,
and all that sort of thing. They need telecom skill sets.
They do. So I'm bringing him up because it's public information. But Axel Klauberg was someone we used to talk to quite a lot at Deutsche Telekom, a senior technology executive there, very much in charge of their
Axel.
Axel, yeah. very, very much sort of leading their all IP strategy and a lot of the stuff that, Light Reading's been running about for years. He went to AWS, I think in early 2020. So, and there's probably a lot like him who've made that transition. If you look at those companies, the parent companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, over the same period that the telcos have cut 230,000 jobs, they've hired 1.2 million workers. Now, a lot of those are Amazon, and it's probably people just in warehouses. But the two other companies have grown substantially in that period of time, and a lot of it will be.
So, and we're not saying there's a traceable direct transfer.
There's not a traceable.
Sorry, another one. Do you remember the CEO of Ericsson UK? She moved to Google Cloud.
Did she?
Yeah, just an
Can't
observation.
remember. Oh yeah, she's that blonde one that you interviewed once.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm interested to see. It's going to be curious to see how far it goes, I think, really. Automation obviously hasn't ended. You could argue it's only just getting started. I mean, things like Open RAN, which we're always going on about, one of the attractions of that is that it allows you to do certain things more easily with fewer staff, supposedly. This is what some of the advocates say. So the whole network sharing thing, one of the reasons Orange wants to use that is that it thinks it will make it easier to have active mobile network equipment and to share that with Vodafone, for instance, in somewhere like Spain. And as I say, that all of a sudden then you get onto, well, if we're reducing the number of base stations dramatically that we need in a country, we don't need the same purchasing teams, we don't need the same engineering and technicians teams to look after all this
It's
stuff.
funny, there's a bit of a tangent there. There's a couple of tangents spring to mind, actually. This isn't an Open RAN chat, but since you mention it, there was a little story earlier on this week about Open RAN using some technology Vodafone using some technology to boost Open RAN capacity. It's especially the technology of a company called Cohere Technologies.
Yeah.
Which I'm pleased I mentioned because they got in touch with me and going, do you want to chat about it? And I just went, nah, I'm all right.
No, they've been.
So at least you got a mention on the pod. Cohere.
Well, I think
if you don't listen, then that's what
we spoke to them about a year ago, and
right.
And they've been sort of in touch with us again recently. But they have an interesting technology for trying to use software to make Open RAN more efficient, basically, and compensate for some.
Make all the bits and bobs work well with each other.
Yeah,
which
and
is the
sort of
ultimate
offset
challenge,
some of the power efficiency stuff. I think that's a problem on the hardware side as well. I mean, I might be getting that slightly. They probably say it's not quite that, but it's in.
Well,
that
I'll
kind
tell
of
you what they
ballpark.
call it. They call it a spectrum multiplier MU-MIMO scheduler. MU meaning multiple user. Spectrum multiplier, God knows, presumably it multiplies spectrum, as you do.
Yep.
You got one spectrum times one spectrum is two. Anyway. And scheduler is presumably something to do with clever AI, making sure everything is used optimally. MIMO is massive in, massive out, which is like the sort of antenna technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just having lots of parallel streams.
Yeah.
And multi-user refers to this Open RAN sort of environment. So they seem to be in the right place at the right time for this sort of thing, so fair play to them. So I don't need to chat to your CEO, I've already got it nailed. By me just having a punt at the name of your product. But in that same story, I had to sort of have a bit of take the piss out of Vodafone a little bit, because they, one of my favourite things is having a go at either badly written or excessively self-promoting press releases. And in this press release, I'll just read what I wrote. I went, Vodafone gets a bit carried away with evangelising later on in the release, declaring, quote, Open RAN is considered the future of networking, as if it's settled consensus. Is considered. What does that mean? By who? By your mate down the pub, who you've just told to say that in exchange for a pint.
Vodafone's big telco mates, basically, and
exactly.
Vodafone.
I love when you have ads and there's like best, and it's just quotes, and underneath the quote there's nothing.
Yeah.
It doesn't even say, like,
could just be
best pizza I've ever had, and then there's nothing
could be
underneath.
something that you got your wife to say.
Yeah.
And I said that remains to be seen, and all that. And then I did another quote. I said, quote, driven by software, it means it's easier and cheaper to extend mobile networks and carry out upgrades without replacing hardware. And I said, once more, confusing marketing hype with established fact. Anyway, and I just concluded and said, once Vodafone starts replacing its existing commercial kit with Open RAN gear and can demonstrate the benefits, we'll start taking these claims seriously. Until then, it's just words. Anyway, that's just a little pop at press release hyperbole. But, it's our ongoing thing. I'm sure it'll be great, but prove it. Until then, why don't you just wind your neck in a little bit? But they're not going to do that, are they?
No.
Because they're paid to bang on about stuff. Back to your your public cloud. I keep fucking that up. I keep saying open cloud instead of public cloud. Back to your public cloud thing. We can't prove, obviously, a direct transfer, but we can say that at the same time one industry's been losing people and others been
it might not be,
and they're both tech industry.
Christ, it might be that you have people who lose their jobs in telecom and end up doing something completely different in the public cloud. I mean, the point is, I suppose, that as long as
we don't need competition.
But jobs are being created in certain areas of the economy. I suppose that's the important thing, and it might just be that. Who knows in the future, we might have telecom networks that basically do run themselves, and the only person there is the CEO and the board, and you have hardly anybody doing it, and all the jobs exist in completely different sectors. I'm not saying it is going to be as extreme as that.
Well, and one thing I do have to say, one thing us journalists do is sometimes just pick a handy narrative without anything to fucking substantiate it.
Yeah. That's substantiated.
No, this isn't a criticism of you, it's a criticism of what I'm about to say.
Right.
Which is, if operators wanted to hasten the exodus of jobs from them to public cloud, they couldn't be doing a better job than just every week there seems to be a news story about them just handing over, managing most of their affairs to a public cloud company. This is the thing,
they're sticking all their workloads and a lot of their systems inside the public cloud. As you say, there's always a new deal, and it seems some of their staff are moving that way as well.
So it's an easy narrative.
There was a deal
to
that
form.
I think we both probably wrote about. I don't know if you did write about it, but the Bell Canada with
No, I
AWS.
saw it but didn't write it up. I remember sending it to you and going, "There's a shocker."
Yeah, and I wrote it, but it's more of the same. It's not a public cloud deal in the way that Dish has done one where it's all in and
right.
Everything it can possibly put in an AWS data center it has done.
Just take
this
stuff.
This is more of an edge deal where they're sort of using. It's a bit like Vodafone's deal in the UK and Germany, where they're using this technology called wavelength at edge facilities. But it's a retreat for telecom because this is, we've talked about this before. Operators were really bullish about the edge a few years ago. We're going to be the big pivotal players in the edge, and we're going to control that ecosystem. And the real empire builders are starting to look like AWS and Google and Microsoft.
I was wondering, do you remember when we've spoken about this before, we've often referred back to an Informer event we went to that was specifically about mobile edge, and we'd be chatting to people and it was quite interesting, and there were like people from industry about what they want and all that. I wonder, A, whether that event still exists, leaving aside the unique circumstances of the last year, and B, who are they going to get to turn up to it? It's going to have to be like AWS and Google and Microsoft.
Well, they will now. I mean, they used to... operators have obviously got an important role, and we don't really know how it's going to play out. I mean, maybe Bell Canada and AWS together turns out to be a really good thing for Bell Canada, and somehow it's able to, generate a lot of new revenues from business customers that it couldn't before, and maybe it takes charge of customer relationships. I don't know, but they weren't. A lot of them weren't so keen on having the big internet companies there in their edge centers a few years ago. There were efforts to have Telecom developed software actually there. Edge Gravity, Ericsson's Edge Gravity was supposed to be doing basically what Wavelength's doing. That collapsed last year.
Yeah.
Mobile Edge X is another one. It's a company that Deutsche Telekom set up to do the middleware platforms, to sort of be in that part of the system. Where's Mobile Edge X? The last thing it announced was something with NTT Docomo that was a proof of concept. It's had none of these deals announced.
When Amazon comes along and goes, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Nice try. We'll take it from here.
Exactly. And analysts, I've read a few analyst blogs on this, and they have a similar line that basically the companies like Mobile Edge X and even Ericsson, which is obviously far bigger than a startup, even though it was backed by Deutsche Telekom, they just can't stand up to a company generating whatever Amazon makes in revenues each year.
So Ericsson and Deutsche Telekom wind these things down, and the people who used to work for them, I don't think you've got to be Sherlock Holmes to have a punt at where those people are going to change their jobs to.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on because we're running out of time. Harmony OS. So we had Harmony OS is Huawei's own device operating system, Android-esque, and it's more than Android-esque because
it's
without
a fork, isn't it?
Yeah, well, without them explicitly saying so. The thing people might forget is that the Android kernel is open source.
Yeah.
and it was always open source. And that was one of the clever things they did right at the start. They bought this company Android for fuck all, like a couple of mil or something, way back in the day, like 15, 20 years ago.
Presumably when the iPhone came out, no?
Well, before that.
Before?
I remember writing before that. And when they obviously saw the writing on the wall, these are clever people. They knew what was in the works.
Right.
And they bought it, and they just made it open source and just said, anyone can get involved. And this is where companies like Google are really clever. And I think this applies to all companies and perhaps even all organizations, is understanding what you can control and what is actually better for you to not control.
I take a cut of it.
Yeah, so let's get other people and get involved in the development process, and then we get all the groovy sort of kudos from being open source as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical about this whole open source. It's almost like zero touch, that expression, open source to me. It's
open source,
one of those.
Yes, open source technically means that anyone can access the source code.
Yeah,
but the clever bit,
you're still going to make money somewhere. So
you've got companies like Red Hat. Shout out to Amy Elston. You never get mentioned on the podcast, so if you're listening, Amy, there we are. I've mentioned Red Hat, and they use open source. They use Linux.
Yeah.
But then they polish the fuck out of it and turn it into this weapons grade.
Yeah, which they then sell
commercial
for a lot
grade
of money.
software, which is fine.
Yeah.
But the underlying kernel is still open source. What that means,
it's not licensed.
I'm not geeky enough to understand why I care.
They're not getting royalties out of it, basically.
Well, they're getting royalties out of their development of it.
They're getting sales out of the development of it, but they're not sort of licensing software in the way that you would. It's either royalty free or it's FRAND, usually in the telecom sector.
Yeah, we go. So, because that's you got standards. They got standards in telecoms.
Yeah, and royalty free is a better term, I think, than open source. But
okay, sure. Whatever. If you want to be a pedant about it.
No. I'm just saying it's like one of those. It's like one of those euphemisms to me. It's like zero touch or closed loop automation. It's one of those terms that people use to make it sound all free. It's like free love, isn't it? Like who are you going to go with? The guy who does open source stuff, or these nasty closed guys wanting some money for what they actually develop?
Walled gardens.
Walled gardens are horrible.
You're right. You're right. As a concept, you're completely right. But I think there's a technical distinction, which is that you can actually get hold of the source code if you're that way inclined and fuck about with it or whatever. I don't know.
Which is what they've done with Harmony.
There we are. So getting back, sort of reeling in the tangent. So I always got that, and they go, it's our own thing, and this is one of the problems. I don't want to overgeneralize, but some of the problems of communications that emanate from Huawei's home country are that they can sometimes be a bit opaque or a bit excessively hyperbolic. And God knows they're not the only ones. I mean, we're going to get onto the US, and they are sinners plenty in this respect.
But Scott, you must embrace
the opaque. That's what's written on Pierre's can of Hazy Jane.
And yours.
Yes, other beers are available. If you're on BBC or something,
there are quite a lot of other beers available, actually.
Other beers are available
right here, right
definitely.
Now.
Yes, so they'll never admit to forking it, and they'll sort of fudge it, and they'll go, we've got 1 billion developers working on it and all that. But they've come up with this thing, and while it was just a fork, it was a bit similar to what Amazon, funnily enough, tried to do about 7 years ago. I remember it was one of the first stories I got involved in when I was here, and I knew what I was talking about because I was a smartphone analyst before. And they just launched these Fire phones, and they're coming in like at the cost of an iPhone, and they weren't even using proper Android, using this fork version. And so getting back to the OS thing, the reason we went off on that tangent is it's all very well building something that's really similar in terms of its underlying software to Android, but where Google was clever, where it was wise to make it open source and let everyone else get involved, is it always knew that it was going to have a service layer on top of all that software, which would be the deal breaker. I mean, the key thing being the App Store, what they call the Play Store.
Yeah.
So because I didn't watch the presentation, does Harmony OS come with Harmony Maps?
Well, it's supposed to. That's the idea.
And they've got loads. They said they've got tons of developers working on it. So they're going to.
We've seen the numbers fail at that.
The numbers getting thrown around seem to sort of vary wildly depending on who it's coming from. So I remember being on Huawei's Analyst Summit or annual report update when they were talking about 2 million developers for Harmony OS already, including 300,000 outside China. And then I asked this week, and it's gone down to 500,000. Right. So I don't quite know what that means. Whether they're measuring it in different ways, but yeah, that's the idea. Is because they can still use Android, the basic and the skeleton of Android, but they can't get things like Google Mail and a lot of the.
But that's the thing. I
apps.
said maps because Chinese people are getting more and more cars right now, like at an incredible pace. And even if it's not straight on your phone, you plug it into the car. You want it to have like, a CarPlay or Android Play, whatever. And when you're driving, you want something reliable, and Apple Maps at the beginning was awful. It's much better now.
It was hilariously shit.
Yeah, but now,
that was about 10 years ago, wasn't
what's
it?
Huawei?
Well, I mean,
offering?
I don't think this move is going to. I mean, I don't know what their intention is really. I mean, I think the IoT play to me is maybe more interesting because that's sort of up for grabs.
Yeah. Well, so let me quickly. Sorry to butt in. I'll finish off what their pitch is.
Yeah.
And we can discuss their pitch.
Did you watch the whole 2 hours?
Yeah. Well, I sort of had it on in the background.
Did it look? Because I heard that it looked a little bit like the Apple presentations.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well, that's what I said. What was it? I said today's Harmony OS event was a protracted live stream featuring the standard slick corporate videos and Jobs-esque hyperbole. Right. So that's completely consistent with what you heard about. Yeah, I mean, everyone tries to do it. Steve Jobs invented the modern technology press event, and fair play to him. Like even down to the last little and one more thing.
Yeah.
No, but the pandemic brought on a whole new style of it, though.
Did it? In what way do you think it's altered?
So Apple used to be just in a theater on stage, and that was it. But now, because they cannot have an audience, they do it all around their headquarters.
Oh, do
and
they
do like fancy camera.
I haven't seen any of them, which is
visual
just as
effects.
well. I'd probably self-harm if I had.
Yeah.
But fair enough. It's got to be done. I just find it all very tedious. One of the things, I don't know if it's especially me as a journalist, but whenever I'm fed marketing, I just bridle at it.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. We want to get to the bottom of it.
And it was all translated as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that was all going on. They didn't have that time where the bloke spoke for about 4 hours and then the poor translator had to catch up. Anyway, but apart from saying it's all going to be great and who fucking needs Android anyway, their thing was that they've got this one unifying that Harmony OS is better than Android, and that a single iteration of it can be used over all kinds of devices, from TVs and PCs all the way down to the IoT devices. I think they said that the least amount of RAM you need is something like 128 kilobytes of RAM, which when you consider RAM comes in gigabytes these days, is a pretty small chip. And they imagined a world where all your shit runs on Harmony OS and it all just talks to each other. And there's some quite clever software by the looks of it, by their demo,
right,
where you get this hub. Your phone becomes this remote control for multiple devices.
Yeah.
A bit like your phone can be like if you're streaming to the TV or something, your phone becomes the remote control to some extent. But for loads of devices and can actually control them, and there's clever interfaces for pairing that really facilitates the pairing process. And as a sort of utopian vision, I thought, okay, yeah, they're trying to do something a little bit different. It did remind me a lot of Apple in so much as, Apple, if you've got all Apple stuff, then it probably does work quite well.
Yeah.
They do work well with each other.
Yeah.
But it is contingent on you having all Apple stuff, obviously.
It is weird. Like when on the Apple TV, when you go in the search bar, and then as you're about to either say it with a microphone or type manually, your phone will show notifications. Hey, do you want to type this here? It's easier here. It's like, ooh, how do you know?
Start being too helpful.
It's all connected,
It's creepy when machines start being too keen and helpful, like a dog.
The trouble is they're not Apple. And
that is
and so
one of their.
So Harmony OS is, there's two ways to do this, and one is to have an ecosystem like Android has, where it goes onto Samsung phones, it goes onto Oppo phones, it goes onto whatever. Their announcement didn't name a single partner company that is using their OS. It's all Huawei, and unfortunately, their own devices business is fucked. I hate to say it, but their biggest problem is not the lack of an operating system. Their biggest problem is they can't get access to chips that
to actually make the stuff.
And that's why their market share has gone down, according to Counterpoint, from 20% last summer to about 4%.
Yeah, exactly. And they made a little nod to it. They mentioned this new flagship called a P50, and there was a bit of muttering from them about going, we'll launch it as soon as the fucking Americans give us half a chance.
Yeah.
That was one of the few times they had a bitch at the Yanks directly.
So I'd be more impressed if they'd said, well, Oppo and Vivo and Realme and all this lot are all of a sudden going to switch and start using Harmony OS. But that didn't happen, and rolling out on their own devices, well, that's great, but their own devices have got big problems that aren't just to do with losing access to Google. Now, the IoT side of things, which is up for grabs because the IoT's been an absolute disaster so far, let's be honest, and has gone absolutely nowhere.
Especially on the consumer side.
On the consumer side. Yeah. Great, let's see what can happen. And I suspect this is
going to
lead to...
they launched a new smartwatch at this event.
Yeah, and this is why there's going to be a lot of this is going to exacerbate trade tension, I think, because you're going to see, and this has already started happening, I think, with this deal in Africa recently, where Huawei was cut out of, you can build this network, but don't use don't use Huawei equipment. I think the same thing could happen almost on the devices side. If Huawei starts to make a big push on IoT, and we want to get Harmony OS, I mean, look, if government authorities have been spooked by the idea of Huawei's hardware being in telecom networks, how are they going to feel about an IoT that's got Huawei at the software centre of it? Yeah,
and suddenly Xi Jinping can activate swarms
Here's your
of drones.
insulin drip that runs on Harmony OS. Here's your self-driving car, which is another area they're trying to get into, by the way, that runs on Harmony OS.
Your electric grid?
This stuff is going nowhere in the West.
No. I made a little analogy with this because they were talking about a thing called a super device, which is what I was referring to earlier, where your phone becomes this sort of hub for all your other devices. And I said, whether this means they will automatically work in concert, a bit like when loads of transformers get together to form one super transformer, was unclear. And that's sort of what I got an image. You what?
That's Power Rangers.
Power Rangers. Oh shit! I'm gonna have to.
I think it's better.
Didn't the Transformers used to get together and make a big transformer?
No, I don't think so.
Damn.
Yeah.
So shit analogy then.
No, I think it's better. I think it's better than you got it wrong, actually.
Yeah, if I said Power Rangers, I would just
that wouldn't be good to mention Power Rangers.
That's anyway, so the point, but yeah, people probably thought I was talking about the component transformer or something. But yes, I mean, but that's, if we've got this one unifying operating system, you do have an image of like, watches suddenly attaching themselves to phones and computers and building up this Harmony
taking you hostage.
I think the other problem is that nobody makes very much money from this stuff anyway. It's like, if you look at Androids, the revenues that Google makes, it's big money, but it's not big money in the context of Huawei or Google. Google's revenues from Android, it doesn't reveal them, but they got disclosed in a court case a few years ago what they were between 2008 and 2016. So it's probably gone up a bit since then, but it wasn't much. It's sort of 20 or 30 billion in revenues over that period of time, not annual revenues, over that whole period.
But that's from the Play Store and everything?
That's everything to do with Android. That's what its revenues are. And that was only disclosed because some lawyer in a court battle brought it up, and it wasn't.
But obviously we know for Google the biggest appeal is that you do your searches on your phone.
And okay, Huawei's not going to dislodge Google in search outside China if it wants to try and do something like that with Harmony OS. But the point is, they're not going to. There's not, certainly from open source, for God's sake, where they might take some money from apps that they provide on this, in the same way that Apple and Google does, presumably, that you take a cut of revenues.
30%.
But even with Apple, it's not a huge. The whole of Apple's services business, everything it gets from software, is going up a lot, and it's big money. But it's not anywhere near what it makes next to hardware.
From the sale of
Huawei's a company that made 137 billion revenues in sales last year, and most of that came from its consumer business. And the big problem for them is they need to do something to, they're either going to shrink a lot and become more software based, or they're going to have to find some way of saving that hardware business. And Harmony OS isn't it.
No, Harmony OS isn't it. And I always, when I cover these events, there's a bit of pathos about it because. Yeah, and they'd hate me for saying this. And sorry if you're listening, Huawei people, but they're forced into a corner, and they're trying to make the best of a shitty situation, and that's what I mean by pathos. Fair play to them. What they're going to do is just throw in the towel.
Yeah.
So they're giving it a go, but yes, I do agree with you that it seems forlorn.
Yeah.
Who's going to use it? I think you can easily see. We talk about balkanization. For some reason, Huawei talks about decoupling But it's this
decoupling from the West.
Yeah, this decoupling of the global tech world. I think I prefer balkanisation, but I suppose a slightly more obscure reference. But anyway, it's easy to see a time where Harmony OS does become the default OS for within China, because it's within the even though the competitors won't want it, it's within the power of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, to go, all right, we're doing this because it hasn't got any horrible Yank stuff in it. And
maybe
wrong accent.
Well, but
so you're fucking changing.
But don't Oppo and Vivo and Realme already use versions of Android that have all the sort of Google juicy stuff removed
but
from
it's still
them
Android.
Anyway.
So it's just Android minus some stuff.
But Android's if it's open source, it's presumably not really controlled by anybody.
No, but this is what we were saying earlier. Android itself. So let me refer you back to a thing that happened about 15 years ago. Acer, who makes laptops, they tried to fork Android. And Google went, no, you can't do that. And they went, fuck you, we'll do what we want. It's open source. And they went, okay, have it your way. But you're not having the Play Store. So that's where Google exerts control. You can't have a Play Store, you can't have Gmail, you can't have Google Maps, you can't have
YouTube.
Yeah, but if Oppo and Vivo are just using the sort of open source part of it and not any of that stuff, and they're still selling phones like hotcakes in China.
But I think they are using Android just minus the apps that the CCP
minus the apps,
bans.
and they've still been very successful.
But that's not the same as a fork. It's totally Android, just with some apps banned by the CCP. What Harmony OS is it's for, if there's forks 90% up the way, Harmony OS is forked, let's say 50% up the software route. That's all.
But does it need to be forked? Is what I'm saying. If is it a big issue? If
I think it does for them to claim it's their own OS.
Yeah.
So Xiaomi and Oppo and all that are not going to claim it's a Xiaomi or an Oppo OS.
No, they're not. But who cares?
At the end of the day, it's a marketing thing. Yeah, at the end of the day.
And if it's a big deal, maybe if it's a really big deal for the Chinese government to have Huawei's operating system in the Chinese market, and they lean on Oppo and Realme and Vivo to do that. Yeah, I guess I could see that happening.
But that's their only market.
But and then there's maybe some African countries that they've basically bought that will do the same thing.
Not Ethiopia, though. Ethiopia's going like, nah.
And this is why I see a battle sort of coming with, in some of these territories where, in bits of Eastern Europe as well that aren't really aligned with the US, where there's kind of there's a kind of a battleground there that's being fought over this stuff. I can see that playing out, but so I can see them having, a presence outside China, but they're certainly not going to make Harmony OS a big deal in the US or in Western Europe. Or in Australia or in New Zealand, any Western, or in Japan, they're not going to,
I just can't even see it in East Asia. I mean, I don't know which parts of the world are quite chummy with China still, because they seem to be running out. But let's say parts of Southeast Asia, let's say Indonesia.
Why would you be? You're only chummy with them because they've basically paid for you to build a new port, and then said that actually we're going to own it.
There might be other reasons. I think their diplomacy is probably not entirely transactional.
Well, they tend to be chummy with people who are authoritarian nut jobs like they are, basically. So you wouldn't be the people themselves aren't friendly.
There we are.
Them,
that's where Harmony is going to proliferate. Venezuela.
Yeah, well,
Turkey.
Look,
exactly.
It's in bloody Ren Zhengfei's statement that he came out with about the software pivot recently. Which country should we look to try and form alliances with on the software front? Russia.
Yeah.
Because they've got lots of mathematicians and physicists. And they also happen to be a bunch of authoritarian nut jobs.
No, they're just the neighbours.
Yeah. Well, they are the neighbours. I mean, China-Russia is going to be an interesting thing because I don't think they've got a lot of natural overlap. Certainly not culturally. But they do have a massive border.
They've both read their George Orwell and thought that sounds like a jolly good system.
Yeah, exactly. But what I find interesting is when you get totalitarians who have that in common, they meet up at the annual totalitarian conference, Total Fest, it's called,
in the forest,
and they all get together and go, sort of exchange anecdotes about how many of their own people they fucked over that year.
Yeah.
And North Korea wins every year.
North Korea is like, don't invite.
Yeah, but they don't have as many people.
They're on different levels.
Don't invite what Kim Jong Il or whatever the latest one is. Kim Jong Un. Yeah, because he always wins. And he goes, well, it's all right. Maduro's doing all right. He's catching up on the outside rail. Anyway, what was I going on about? Yes, Russia and China is going to be an interesting one because China might end up relying increasingly on Russia as it's doing a great job of alienating itself from the rest of the world right now. How this lab leak thing's going to play out, it fascinates me.
Yeah.
Because if it becomes consensus...
I don't think it's going to play out. Because I think any evidence that China, that it did come from a lab will by now have been destroyed by China. So we'll never actually find out where it came from.
They're holding investigating ground.
Yeah, no,
it won't ever emerge, the actual origins of it.
I completely concede that, but it might come to a point, if you think of the pivot that's happened over the course of the last month in terms of the prevailing public narrative, where as little as 2 months ago, if you said lab leak, then you were just an idiot conspiracy theorist, and now suddenly everyone's like, well, yeah, it could be. It's easy to imagine that by the end of this year, it's going to be established consensus, again, without the hard evidence, without the smoking gun. Then what that will mean in terms of global geopolitics will be interesting. Go for it, mate. Just pile in and open it up. Anyway, and so my point is that they're running out of geopolitical allies. You could argue they don't need it because they've got a population of 1.2 billion people and they've got loads of money and loads of technology and they're much more strongly positioned than Russia ever was in a Cold War situation.
India is an angry neighbour.
India's not happy. They keep clubbing each other with fucking...
No, they don't No, they did that once. I don't think they keep doing it.
Well, I'm a journalist. They keep doing it.
It's
clubbing
dramatic.
each other.
It's constant.
Oh, the Indians and the Chinese.
Yeah, on that.
Anything so that it wouldn't declare war.
A bit of Walking Dead baseball bat action.
What can we do that wouldn't declare war? Well, we could use
just
blunt
give them
metal
bats
pieces.
and say, give them bats and some beer.
We need a strong alliance with India to sort of.
This is a really good segue into the final segment, which we need to do anyway. Oh shit, we've really run out of time. We're going to have to make this short and sweet. Sorry to butt in, but Pierre's got to do something else in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Have you?
Yeah. He sent that message, didn't he? That's why he told us to get a move on. So India is a classic ally. So clearly, the last thing you want to do is be a dick to them. But the US, one of two things the US has done this week, they're threatening to put 25% tariffs on a bunch of goods coming out of Austria, India, Italy, Spain, Turkey, and the United Kingdom.
The UK?
Yeah.
What happened to our special relationship post-Brexit?
Quite. All because we're all introducing this thing called a digital services tax. So it's back to your big tech. Basically, all these countries have got the arsehole because the likes of Amazon, Google, Facebook, etc., can make loads of money out of us and then just go, no, I made it in Ireland, or I made it in the Falklands or something. And just move it around because it's digital. There's no physical goods. I mean, even Amazon, yes, it ships physical goods, but it doesn't make most of them.
Yeah.
So it's still a service provider. It should be
where people are paying for it.
It should be. So that's what these countries are saying is, well, they paid for it here, so we want a tax. And America's going, hold on a minute.
Right too.
America's going, hold on a sec, they're HQ'd here. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I'm disappointed with Biden on that front then, if that's...
Right, well, yes.
Not that I was ever optimistic about that dozy old sod in the first place. But,
you'd think he would want to tax them more than Trump would.
Yeah, but he wants the revenue.
He wants the money for himself.
So this is tax. This is UK taxing.
He's got to pay up $6 trillion. So
he's got some debts, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so and then they I've got to read out the quote actually from their ambassador who said it because it's just so slimy. So they imposed these retaliatory tariffs, but then suspended it straight away. And so this is just a sort of crude way because there's negotiations on the way. We've obviously done our unilateral action.
Yeah.
And then we've gone, all right, then let's have a chat about it.
Yeah.
And then while we're chatting about it, they've gone, well, we're going to do some unilateral action, so fuck you. Anyway, and so they've done this thing and suspended
shipments
it.
of Newcastle Brown Ale or something.
Something like that. Yeah. Or whatever else we make. What else do we make?
Don't make anything
Rolls-Royce.
It's either Newcastle Brown Ale or financial services, I'm afraid, these days from the UK.
What about Brewdog?
Aston Martin.
There's Brewdog, yeah.
Aston Martins, yeah.
Glenfiddich.
So there's a few things. We do make a few things, bless us. Anyway, so here's Ambassador Catherine Tai of the US Trade Representative said, quote, "The United States is focused on finding a multilateral solution to a range of key issues related to the international taxation, including our concerns with digital services taxes. The United States remains committed," and she said it again, it's basically the same thing. The United States remains committed to reaching a consensus, blah, 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 blah. Noise, noise, noise. Today's actions provide time for those negotiations to continue. No, they don't. They don't provide. It's such doublespeak. Today's actions provide time for those negotiations to continue to make progress while maintaining the option of imposing tariffs under Section 301 if warranted in the future. They don't do anything. All they are is a crude way of raising the stakes, trying to give yourself some more negotiating chips in the middle of the process. So that's one thing America's doing, and I've got some sympathy. They can't just, if the companies are HQ'd in the US and current accounting norms is that they pay their taxes in the US, and we just go, we're having some money off them, without it going through a proper due process, then they're entitled to go, well, two can play at the unilateral sanctions game. On the flip side, as that quote I hope demonstrates, there's no good faith in this. It's just everyone's just dicking about with each other.
There's a bit of sour grapes here, isn't there? Because Europe and the UK have failed to sort of produce any huge tech cloud companies that go around doing the same sort of thing as Google, Amazon and Microsoft. So, it's like, you guys have been very successful. We'll have a bit of that.
We're a bit butthurt that so much sort of VAT and revenue being spent by our citizens is going to US.
Yeah, but on the other hand, that's the point. Where I'm sympathetic is these big, they're not US firms, they're multinational firms now, and they play a massive role in the economies of Europe and the UK, and they've taken jobs actually from
I'd love to know what the total amount of...
as we were talking about earlier, it ties back to the automation thing,
It is. They've created jobs too.
Yeah, they have created jobs, but the jobs that they've created have removed jobs from other areas. And there's no doubt that retail suffered because of Amazon. Bookshops have suffered because of Amazon. That's one of the oldest ones. But
it's got into groceries now. They're quite competitive on fresh stuff.
Exactly. I mean, even my parents have ordered groceries through Amazon in the last few weeks.
It's coming.
I mean, what next?
When your own parents in their 70s are ordering groceries through Amazon,
the
world is coming to a reaching a very disappointing phase, I think.
It says something about their sort of market penetration, doesn't it? Yeah. Even your, I'm sure, very savvy and clued up parents. Ian's shaking his head, listening.
I really had to motivate my mom to use it. It's like, I don't want them to have my credit card. And it's like,
they might get up to all sorts.
All sorts of bother.
Exactly. And then the other thing they have done, which I wrote about today, is they banned investment in a bunch of Chinese companies. So they've got this bright idea that if China Mobile's shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, then the buying and selling of those shares will somehow, by not only benefit China Mobile, but by proxy will benefit the Chinese government. Now, I've got several problems with this. So they banned that. So they'd already banned, like, this is the thing from the start of the year. It's called Executive Order 13959. It's something Trump came up with, like, at the end of last year when he was really just having a laugh and just going, and we'll have another executive order saying that all pants have got to be green. Yeah. He's just fucking about at that stage. I
think that's a brilliant one, by the way. I reckon Biden should pick that one up and run with it. The pants have to be green.
He'd probably come out and show them off at this stage. And all these handlers running after him. Someone's got one of those shepherd's crooks yanking him from the side of the stage. So this executive order said, there's all these quotes in it where they basically say that, and they call it a national emergency. This is another thing governments do. As soon as they want to do something, they just say, it's a national emergency. Yeah. There's a purple pants national emergency and we've got to do something about it. And everyone goes, so if it's an emergency, then go for it. And then they've just decided, they basically joined these dots between American investors buying equity in Chinese companies and China getting really good at guns and threatening America, which I think is bollocks. I think it's a really tenuous link. One of the points I made is that I don't know how it works with Chinese listings, but when a company goes public, they have an IPO, and that's the one time they get money from their shares. They go, we're going to sell 1 million shares, and we're going to trouser that money, and then those 1 million shares are just in the public domain, getting chucked around. The company doesn't benefit. Pierre goes and buys some shares in Informa tomorrow. Informa doesn't actually directly benefit. I suppose in a small way it pushes the share price up by an increment, but that's the only way in which Informa directly benefits. It doesn't get the money that Pierre's just paid for those shares. So I think that's disingenuous, but I think the real thing that winds me up is a more civil liberties thing. I might just read my final paragraph thing I wrote. I said, even more egregious, however, is the unilateral conscription of US citizens into this economic war. America is supposed to be the land of the free, but every day brings a new set of restrictions on behaviour from its government. What an individual chooses to buy and sell should be no concern of any government beyond the scope of law enforcement. So you can't buy and sell a fucking bag of Coke or something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment on whether that's a good or bad thing.
So all this stuff about Biden being more, sort of rowing back some of the Trump stuff.
No, and this is a Trump thing, and he's doubling down on it. He's doubling down on it. And I said, so my final sentence is, by recklessly curtailing the civil liberties of its citizens, the US is currently doing far more damage to itself than the Chinese military could dream of.
Yeah.
And this is this self-harm thing. In the name of some kind of weird, tenuous, it's helping the Chinese build more guns or missiles or ships or whatever. They're saying to US citizens, here's another thing you can't do. On top of all the other stuff you can't do. In this land of the free, we're protecting freedom against the horrible, oppressive Chinese. Here's some more shit you can't do.
Yeah.
So I think that's properly dodgy. Cool. All right. Well, we're nearly
on that bombshell.
We're nearly at Pierre's time that he's got to do things. It's nice to end on a Scott rant.
We should make it a habit.
Yeah, exactly. When I'm a couple of beers into the podcast. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. So thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.